Hello, HR Exchange Network. Thanks for joining us here at Corporate Learning APAC. Now, before we kick off, thank you very much for joining us here today. If you've joined our sessions prior, if you've missed them, don't worry, they're available on rewatch on demand for up to a month post-event. So before we get underway with our session with UpsideLMS, just a quick reminder of what you can see there on your screen, as it's super toggle friendly. Any resources in the resource center, they're complimentary to download, so do take advantage of that. Feel free to connect with Amit on LinkedIn, carry the conversation on after today. Any questions you do have, drop them into the Q&A box and I'll get round to asking them at the end. Now, this session is going to focus on building a resilient workforce with the right L&D strategy, budget and impact. Delighted to hand over to Amit Gautam, CEO of UpsideLMS. So Amit, the floor is now yours. Over to you.
Thank you and good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. And in the next half an hour, I'm trying to look at kind of a very relevant topic for today's times, and that is how to build resilience in the workforce, and why is it critical for us to look at that context. So, of course, in the last 2-3 years, and the pandemic being a key driver to kind of force organizations to relook at how they are building the workforce. And that has also kind of made L&D become a central point to the discussions, in the business. And today we are going to focus on how do we build a resilient workforce, but with right L&D strategies, how to make a budget for that, and how to measure impact for what we are building in the L&D department. So before we start, let's just look at a few kind of numbers, some of the recent surveys we have been reading about, and a recent LinkedIn Learning survey, kind of a big number, 94% of employees they surveyed, they said that they would stay at a company longer if the company is investing in their learning and development. And that is not a surprise at all. We know this all along. And I think, there's also a need for companies to relook at the learning and development strategy or the function just beyond a handful of people or maybe a few layers of organization. A more inclusive approach to leadership is what people are looking at. And of course, this is something we have been observing as a kind of a part of the L&D landscape for the last many years now, that increasingly L&D is becoming a strategic part of the companies. And in the last at least 3 years, we have seen that the discussions which have kind of been with us as service providers, they are now going from L&D department to the HR function to even the business functions, which is a good sign. And it is not for no reason. We will see how it is linked to building the resilience and why it is critical for the L&D to move forward. So what we will try to look at is, given the time we have at hand, is how do we improve and enhance learner engagement, because that is a key part of the L&D's success and performance outcome. And what do we consider as factors while we are budgeting for L&D? L&D budgeting is not an easy area. There is no straightforward number to do that. But what are the various factors we can look at while budgeting for L&D? How to measure the impact or the learner impact of whatever we do in the L&D function, and kind of summarize that and look at a starting point for the companies to evaluate the current L&D. How do we start from where we are today? So I think before we look at the L&D's strategies and the budgeting kind of process, let's look at what is resilience and why are we talking about it today. So, of course, pandemic, as I said, is a key driver. It showed us that, the business is prone to a massive disruption with no notice or with little time to plan. And the only way to survive, what we have done in the last 3 years, or we would have to do in the maybe next few years if something like that happens again, is to build resilience within the company. Every department, every function, every process, everybody in the company has to understand and learn resilience as a skill. It is not just a mere mindset of a few people. It has to inculcate across the entire company if the company has to survive multiple such waves of disruption in the future. And when it comes to resilience, people and technology are key to resilience. It is a mix, a very, very, I would say, a very intelligent mix of people and technology. So we have to adapt a new technology, new tools, new digital functions, and we have to also empower our people not to just learn those technology, but also have a different mindset when it comes to resilience. We need to be able to leverage new technologies and imbibe them with the human skills to achieve, resilience across the business. And I think it is more of a mindset shift, across the company, where we have to move away from, let's say, an annual training plan or a quarterly training plan or like a milestone-based plan to a constant and continuous improvement and innovation mindset. So it has to be built in as a learning culture in the company that every single person, every single process, every single day, they undergo, a process improvement on a gradual basis. And that would require almost continuous and very persistent upskilling and reskilling of the people in the company. So let's say, we have kind of made a point that yes, L&D, and we know L&D has become a very key part of the business in the last many years now. And one challenge which has always remained in L&D is how do we improve the learner engagement? How do we make sure that learners are learning, they're interacting with the learning kind of interventions, and it is actually engaging so that whatever time they're spending on learning is productive and the output is aligned to the business goals. So there are simple steps to improve learner engagement. I think one of the basic and maybe sometimes ignored point is learner needs. A lot of times we have seen that we design and devise learning interventions based on what a handful of people kind of believe as skills gap or what they believe would be required for people to learn. I think in the last many years we've seen there's a gradual shift where companies are now looking at what do the learners need, because there is a change in how they access information. There is change in their mindset. There is a change in the way they have kind of understood and learned through their education phase. And that is also impacting how they are demanding access to learning and how they are demanding the content to be consumed. So it is very important to understand the learner needs are diverse and their expectations are becoming different from each other. And it is very difficult to create a learning strategy which is like a one size fit all. It is very, very difficult to do that. So it is very critical to move on to a phase of hyper personalization. Whatever tools we are using, whatever learning interventions we are designing, they have to have an element of personalization for each learner. Otherwise, we risk losing this learner's attention and engagement. And in the end, the outcome will not be delivered from learning function. We have to also factor in the digital fatigue, the digital transformation happening at scale at every company today. It is also entailing and almost, kind of resulting in a constant use of digital devices. Everything we are doing is now digital, and it is leading to a very credible and very tangible digital fatigue, which has to be factored in, because if learning is also going digital, we're only heading to the fatigue. So we have to be very mindful of what are we designing and how it is impacting the digital fatigue. I think last point here in this slide is, given the kind of work and more work required per person in the company, given the scenarios today, learning has to be available in the flow of work. It is very difficult for learners to get out of the flow of work, seek learning, and then go back to the work. They are increasingly demanding that the learning is available within the flow of work while they're working. It could be performance support, it could be queries, it could be an access to an expert or a facilitator, but it has to be aligned with whatever they are doing in the flow of what they're doing. Of course, the engagement can also result from designing the learning programs very flexibly. We cannot just say every program will be a classroom-based program or a e-learning program. it has to be a very smart mix of various formats available to us. It could be a classroom training followed by a self-paced module, followed by interactive video, maybe again then maybe followed by a peer-to-peer community session. In all the methods we kind of employ and deploy for learning, they have to be interactive, and they have to have an element of either social or peer-to-peer or a community learning, and it has to become a part of our learning culture. We have so I think in my view we have to be able to leverage all the kind of avenues available to us for learners to be able to learn something or the other from each avenue. And if we do that, the engagement becomes high because everybody is able to find their choice of avenues available to them to start and keep learning. It also leads to an era where the learning elements might become shorter in terms of duration, but they have to become more powerful. And we have to also be able to cater to on-demand learning. So we cannot just kind of put something somewhere and I want people to kind of access that and learn. We may have to also cater to the demands when, let's say, if I need something now, how do I access that? Is it available? Can I search for it? Can I talk to somebody? Can I ask someone? So we have to be able to function that in our learning engagement practices. Now, of course, designing learning interventions is one part of the learning strategy. The overall challenge is still how do we budget in this today's scenario where where learning is becoming so variable. If you look at things change almost every quarter. It is not easy. It is not impossible, but it's not easy to kind of create a budget for the entire year. So what do we look at as factors when we are looking at L&D budget? Because businesses will still need to function on some financial parameters. They still need to understand overall, either a budget or a cap or a range of amount to be spent. And more than the business, it is for also L&D department, because if they can budget it well, they can plan their activities well. It is like a cycle. If you plan it well, you have good budget. If you have good budget, you can execute the plan really well. So in my view, I think it might require for us to kind of redraw the entire blueprint of skills, the kind of skills we need in the business. What are the skills we require? But from a point of view of business goals, and not just skills perspective that, there's a team of developers, so they need development skills. There's a team of, marketing, so they need marketing skills. I think it is now important and critical that we start top down, look at the business goals, and then kind of percolate that down to each individual level of say, okay, what do these people need as skills today and tomorrow to align to these business goals? It also might be prudent and practical to not look at just hours per employee in a year or a quarter. That, okay, everybody has to do 10 hours of training, because there may be some functions or people who may need more training. There may be some who may need less training. There may be some who need more designated training. There may be some who need less designated but more on-demand training, and as they want to learn. So I think we have to factor in all of these kind of parameters here. And we need to be able to plan individualized plans for teams and groups and people, right from induction to upskilling, reskilling, and then on-demand skilling. These would be the key factors here. And a change we have seen in the last few years is that companies are now looking for certifications, verified skills, which may be internal or even external, like industry experts or industry agencies or bodies might be used to create certifications for some skills or various skills within the company. And I think one point we have to look at is that other than access to training content and maybe access to trainers and instructors, there is a need to create a network and community of facilitators and master facilitators, either within the company as experts or subject matter experts or domain experts or skill experts, or if required, even outside the company through various channels. And this needs to be factored in the budgeting part, because this may have a substantial impact on how or what kind of budgets are we looking at. One kind of a side or a parallel factor, which may not be directly linked to training, is that while we're talking about all of these things, every company is going through a digital transformation. Some of us have gone through it faster than others. Some of us still going through that, and I think it will continue. As more and more tools become digitized, as our processes become automated and digitized, there is a constant need which is there, which is going to be skilling everybody in the company on these new tools. And it's not going to be easy. A company will still have a range of people from, in terms of diverse, in terms of their background, education, age, multiple factors. So they will have varying level of adaptation to these skills. They may have a varying level of readiness for these skills. So some of the skills may not just require learning that skill, but also require maybe changing the mindset or behavioral approach, or even soft skills to understand how to acquire those skills. So this might be ignored in many cases because it looks like a de facto part of the implementations that, okay, if we implement a new system, they will provide training to the users. But I think more than the training, it is important for us to understand that if our people understand these tools better, then they will perform better and the business will benefit from that. So there's a need to additionally plan for digital transformation skilling. And, of course, it has already started. We can no longer depend only on the classroom mode training or self-paced training. I think we have to deploy a range and a mix of modes to allow people to learn. It could be e-learning, certifications driven, AR, depending on the industry we are in. But yes, there is a need to do that. And while we are focusing on the personalized training part, I think it's also important to kind of create cohorts or group-based training kind of processes. Because anything which is group-based, of course, groups have to be smaller or as per the requirement, but they also foster a peer-to-peer learning culture. They also foster a communicative mindset or a collaborative mindset much faster. And hence, of course, making the team stronger, making our goals more achievable. And in terms of the platforms, I think we would definitely, believe and encourage most companies to look at tools like LMS, LXPs. Even if you're a small company with 100 people or a large company with 100,000 people, I think having a tool or multiple tools in place is a key. Given it is efficient, it kind of saves cost. And I think more than that, it allows a very, very, I would say, a good level of personalization of content and learning for each department and each person. Now, while we are doing all of this, let's say we've got the right budgets in place, we've planned everything. A question which is always asked to L&D and is, what is the impact of what we are doing in the L&D function? And of course, this remains a debatable area across experts, across industries. And, while we have a lot of models to assess the skill gained in the short term, there's always a challenge in how do we assess it in the long term? And then how do we tie in the performance benefit of training or learning to a business goal? So, of course, it still remains as elusive as ever. But yes, it does not mean that we cannot attempt to create a metric or a kind of a framework for our own organization to assess some kind of impact coming from the L&D. And in my view, the performance impact measurement of L&D starts a little backwards. You have to start from the business goals. What is the business trying to achieve, and why the L&D was put in the place in the first. Why was L&D kind of initiated in the first place? And if possible, create some high-level metrics which can answer these questions in the long term and short term. I think one thing which I definitely would want to kind of emphasize here is that impact measurement is a long-term process. And when you want it, it has to start at least 5-6 years before that, because you have to build in a lot of data to reach a point where you can see some trends, because there are a lot of factors which are involved in the business scenario. For example, when pandemic happened, almost every company which was digital, they kind of grew very fast. Now, it is very difficult to ascertain that if that growth was because of the people's skills or because of the environment or any other factor. So we have to build a lot of data in place across many years, and this may take time. But if we want this to happen in the right manner, we have to start at some point and keep building the data, and then we can use the data and create a lot of insights and see some trends happening, and are possibly able to tie up the L&D output or performance with the benefits to business. And while we are doing this, it is also very critical that these are actionable insights and outcomes, in terms of, what do we do with this data? And then what are the action points for the data we are gathering? And then, of course, I think while we are doing this long-term data planning, it is also critical to build in processes for short-term or on-the-job assessment of skills, let's say after 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, some very immediate data points where we can see, okay, before this L&D intervention happened, this is what we were looking at. But after the L&D intervention happened, we're looking at a slight improvement or a change, or maybe no change. So that there is a constant feedback going back to the L&D and the people in the impact measurement. So I think just to summarize, and I'll leave the room open for Q&A here, is that I would say the critical point is that let us kind of plan the L&D from a top-down and a business goals approach. So if we want to, let's say the business says we want to grow our revenue by 20%, then go back and see all the impact points in that kind of business goal. Is it sales and marketing? What has been the trend so far? We have had how do we impact all of these factors individually? And then set very practical and measurable L&D goals, which are tied to strongly tied to business goals. So each department-wise or group-wise or team-wise, we can look at that function. Of course, very critical is to include a very good mix of learning formats, and along with that, a very smart mix of learning tools, either LMS or LXP or assessment systems or multiple. There are so many tools available, but have a very smart mix. Do not rely on only one format. Let's say we will only do e-learning, or we will do half e-learning, half classroom. Of course, cost is a very big factor, but looking at the learners' requirements is also very critical. Some of them may be very, I would say, good at learning from mobile devices. Some of them may be good at learning from classroom environment. So understand and personalize wherever possible. And I think in today's time, my, I would say, request to the L&D functions is that keep it flexible and keep it very convenient for learners. Given the digital fatigue and everything else happening around us, it is very important for learners to be able to feel comfortable when they are learning. If they are under pressure or stress, or they are just doing for the sake of it, the outcome will not really be beneficial either for the person or for the company. And then create a process and a culture for constant feedback. What are we learning? Is it helping us? Short-term, long-term, medium-term, multiple data points. This is a painful and long process. It does not, because there is no data which comes immediately. Okay, we did the training, our sales went up by 1% or 2%. That does not happen. But if you have enough data across years, you can start seeing some nice trends and correlation between L&D and other business goals. So let's say, in 1 year, the L&D was not very active. Did it impact the business? So multiple things can come out of that data point. So I think that's all from my side for today. I hope, I could share some of my experiences in a good way. And, I'll be happy to take up any questions.
Thank you, Amit, for a great insight there. Audience, any questions, feel free to drop them into the Q&A widget and hit submit. At one point you mentioned really clearly is, where possible, personalize, which seems to be such a focus for organizations at the moment. Now, when it comes to, say, personalization, what tips have you got here?
So for example, let's say, very simple example, let's say you're implementing an LMS system in your company. Now, does that LMS system have enough, features or modules let's say very simple, in a very, very basic level, can a learner search for some content which is available in the system and maybe create their own learning journey in parallel to whatever the company is mandating for them to cover? That is a very small and a simple flexibility, but it allows learners to kind of take control of their learning in some manner. Also, let's say if I as a learner learn faster from mobile devices, or I'm always on the field, does the learning content come with multiple formats? Is it mobile ready? Is it good for mobile consumption? Otherwise some learners might feel left out because they don't have a laptop access all day, and the content is available on a laptop, not mobile devices. So a very simple ignorance on the technology part might leave some learners out. So the personalization part is across multiple aspects. One is the technology or the devices used. One other is the content design, and third is the how easy it is for learners to be able to look for something they need to learn.
In terms of those that are starting out more embryonic in their journey when it comes to, say, embedding in an LMS or even transitioning to a new one, what's your tips here and advice?
So I think, for a very practical advice is to kind of map out your requirements and your goals before you start interacting with any service providers or LMS providers. Create a kind of list of questions you need answers for before you kind of embark on that kind of mission of implementing a system, and spend time in doing demos. If you shortlist 2-3 providers, but do a good comparison demo for all of them, and take your time before you implement any system. The key things will be to look out for will be kind of what kind of tools it has built in for learners and their managers. Is it allowing a dashboard for managers to see how the teams are doing? Does it come with a mobile ready app or a mobile ready browser access? And how strong is a search tool for the LMS for learners and administrators? And what kind of I would say scale up it is allowing you to do. So tomorrow, let's say if you go from 1,000 people to 10,000 people, can the same tool handle that easily? So look for LMSs which are good for small, medium, and even large enterprise companies without changing the system.
Mm-hmm. Great advice there, Amit. So before we close out our session today, last question on tips and advice. For the audience, what's the overall takeaway that you would give peers today?
So I think, what I have seen in the last few years is that it is now becoming easy, and which is a very strong benefit for any company of any size, from any country, any domain, to be able to implement technology, because technology not only has become much more affordable, it has become really strong. And I think, sometimes we look at the budget or the cost as a limiting function for implementing new tools. But I think we have to look at it in the reverse direction. Implementing new and strong tools will actually help us save cost in the long run, and also make our company much more agile and resilient in the times today. So I think I see a question for underdeveloped countries. So I think the tools are available to everybody today. There are a lot of tools available. If there is a requirement, we can help with kind of understanding that in detail, and then propose a solution. But yes, I think technology is now no more expensive to implement, and it is a very good way to start the process.
Yeah, and I'll just touch on that briefly, because you're right, we do have a question here, and it is of high priority actually when you're looking at advice for L&D professionals in underdeveloped countries who are far away from that digitalization, upskilling and reskilling. So what advice would you give those?
So I think the number one advice I would give is that start somewhere. Start with a tool. If it's not very expensive, start with something. But the key thing will be to look at the kind of content available with the tool, because upskilling is finally about the right content. LMS is a great tool, And I think you'll be able to find a few good LMS solutions. As I said, my team can help if somebody wants to discuss this in detail. How do we take this forward? But yes, I think today's time there is nothing available or not available to anybody. The global boundaries are not very strong. Digital boundaries are really, really weak. We can implement a system anywhere in the world, and we have customers across the world. We can support them really well. So I don't think that is really a big challenge. But yes, I would say starting with a tool would be the first step, and looking at the right content.
Last question. Sorry to just throw this in last minute, but it's really about how do we continue to engage the learner. That seems to be a number one priority for organisations, creating that pathway of continuous engagement. So how would one create an L&D program for continuous learning?
So two main things in my view. One is the relevance of content. Let us not flood learners with content they either already know or they don't need to know. Give them only what they need to know in their current and next immediate skill requirement. And the second will be, I think, keeping the content short in duration. So deploy macro learning or learning nuggets, or even performance support where they can just search for a chatbot for learning. There are tools available. But I think relevance of content to the learners is key. If I don't want to learn something, why should I be required to do that training just for the sake of it? So I think that kind of turns off a lot of learners, and they don't want to come back to learning because of that. So keep it relevant, keep it short, and keep it interactive. Videos or podcasts, multiple formats, and mobile devices compatible.
Excellent. Amit, thank you for your insight today. It's been an honour and a pleasure having UpsideLMS and yourself joining us here to partner at Corporate Learning APAC. Audience, stay tuned. You'll see a join now orange button. We're going straight through to be joined by Karen at PT&T. So I'll see you there. Once again, Amit, thank you very much for your contribution today.
Thank you.